This is the second KOINE broadcast. Again, I remind the viewer, KOINE refers to common, and this is called KOINE News. Now, I learned this from listening to preachers all these years. They always try to alliterate, start points or some things in their message, or it helps. It's like a mnemonic device. It helps remember something. But KOINE News, we are considering tense and how does it affect our understanding of the New Testament tense. And in the first broadcast, we considered present tense and literally used 1 John 5:1, which we can return to that. And this time we talk about perfect tense, and I'll reference my nice new clean English grammar to Ace New Testament Greek by Samuel Lamerson booklet. It's a nice little booklet, page 75. It says this word is in the perfect tense, which means that the action it refers to is finished, but the results of the action continue on. And of course, the example was from John 19:30, where Jesus stated it is finished. That is, it has been finished in the past, completed, and at that moment he's finished it, and it has continuing results. It says this is perhaps the most well-known Greek word in evangelicalism, for it is an integral part of the well-known witnessing program called Evangelism Explosion. Jesus is speaking from the cross, and this is the last of his 7 words which he speaks shortly before he dies. So a lot of emphasis has been built around that text and the perfect tense. So I'm not sure of any apparent embarrassing difficulty associated with it, except as the first broadcast indicated, there's always this conflicted notion that's suspended or sustained between things that continue to ever grow, like Calvinism or Arminianism. And we'll look at the perfect tense and use that same verse, 1 John 5:1, and see how that helps us. And in this nice 1923 beginner's grammar, I noticed inside the cover it had listed for $3 when it was originally published. I suppose it was more than 3 when I bought it, but probably not much more than 3. But it's interesting. It recommends Essentials of Biblical Hebrew, Hebrew Lexicon, a new short grammar, all these things on the back. Kind of interesting how much was there. But it says the perfect tense expresses the continuance of a completed action. And it says this kind of action expressed by the perfect tense is sometimes called perfective action. And that's enough of that. We'll have plenty of time for Greek lessons or whatever that's called. And for now, we'll return to 1 John, and let me make certain that I'm keeping all this where you can read it. A lot of people at our church would rather review these lessons and be able to look at them anywhere. So here's 1 John 5:1 again. We reviewed this in lesson 1. This is how I'm expressing it, what I like to call KOINE English. Everyone who is believing. And again, the first lesson we emphasized that ing and person believing that Jesus. Now we're just looking at the first sentence in that verse, the first half of that verse, that Jesus is the Christ. And this is where we pick up with the verb, the perfect that we want to deal with, has been generated. That's often translated born, which is fine, or begotten. Generated, and that's out from the God. That's how it's written in KOINE. a definite, very definite kind to which he makes reference, not vague and ambiguous or quality in this text. But it has been generated. Now, the emphasis in lesson 1 was on the fact that the perfect tense showed antecedent action, which for us placed the birth, being born again, being born, placed that first ahead of believing, and just a reminder, the embarrassing difficulty between Calvinism and Arminianism doesn't exist in the KOINE New Testament. It's very simply or commonly expressed, very wordy, and it makes it clear that born is antecedent or prior to believing with an ing. And as I've said before, you might find a Calvinist professor that emphasizes the antecedent aspect of the perfect tense, but then not really bring attention to this continuous present tense of believing. And now in this lesson, I'm not only bringing attention to the antecedent that the new birth does precede believing ing, but nowhere in the common KOINE text will you find the new birth preceding believe punctular, and that's already been established. Certainly nothing I sought to prove, and nor anything I could find debatable. The text either says it or not in KOINE, in the KOINE Greek. But now I want to emphasize has been generated and then look at the continuing results. So how would that be worded? Has been generated and or with the results of that continuing, or we can just say and continues for the moment. You can just put that in parentheses, and you understand has been generated meaning completed in the past, completed in the past. So we have a point where it's completed, and then we have a continuation. Now, the idea of everyone, this birth precedes the believing. What is it that's causing someone to continue to be believing after they're born again? Well, it's the nature of the new birth. The new birth is perfective. That is, it is completed in a point in time, and it has continuing results. So as the results continue of the new birth, so also believing is one of those consequences of the continued results. It's among the continued results of the new birth. Not only are you continuing to be the results of being born again, do they continue, which again, let's say an Arminian systemic mental construct would not acknowledge that, and it's certainly not always intentional. A lot of what people construct, they become so invested in it that they have to support it. They've overinvested, so they have to go and continue to sustain an argument, and they have cognitive bias where they don't want to hear something. And of course it's regrettable, but we could all be that way if we yield to our own propensities and traditions rather than the KOINE text. And that's why it's better as KOINE Christians, as we're called, who aren't Calvinist or aren't Arminian, but we prefer to be scripted by the text rather than write upon it our thoughts or ideas. So the reason why a person is continuing believing is because of the perfective case or tense of the idea here, the verb here being used, generated, and continues to be generated, or the results and consequences continuing, and that would be where the rationale comes from. You say, well, why is it ing after the new birth? Well, it's because it's perfect tense. The new birth here, speaking here, is in the perfect tense. It's a has been born previously prior to believing, completely born, generated prior to believing, and the results continuing. The results or consequences or benefits in this text would be to sustain our faith. And that's why in 1 John a Christian can read and see that his faith will overcome the world. That would be another consequence of the perfect tense. Let's look at a couple more verses that use the perfect tense, and you can of course look these up at your convenience. And this is just broadcast number 2, but really using that same text to emphasize how the perfect tense also here. 1 John 2:29, which is a very good one as well. There's several in this text. It says everyone who has been, or everyone who is doing the righteousness. It's a definite article in the text. The KOINE common, very wordy. So let's say the justice for a moment. It's a state or condition, a kind of justice. Doing is the operative word. Everyone who is doing is what it literally says in the KOINE. Everyone who is doing. These are just parts of that verse. Doing the justice. It says that person has been. Here's the perfect tense. Has been regenerated. And of course that's out from thee, God, which now puts the birth, being born from above, born out from God, precedes doing the justice. And it, because it's perfect tense, it has a completed, once for all, has been generated previously, prior to the doing of justice, and the results continue. Like the present tense, we learned it was linear, action, linear. But this point here is established as complete because of the perfect tense and the benefit of it. So thus far we have the new birth. The consequences of the perfect tense of being regenerated gives us believing, ing, an ing kind of faith. And no, I couldn't do that. That was the result of the new birth. It gives us a doing, a doing of righteousness, the justice, a definite kind of righteousness, which in the context refers to our relationship to our brethren, refers to our relationship to the commandments of Christ, our relationship to each other, and of course those are not exclusive. We have no ability as KOINE Christians throughout the centuries being taught by our master teacher to have a relationship with God vertically without having one horizontally with our brethren. So 1 John is very good at giving or attributing to the new birth the consequences of doing. It says we are not sinning, ing again. There's the ing. What is sustaining our refusal to be doing this? And of course in the text it's to deny Jesus has come in the flesh. It's to promote hate for the brethren. It's to not keep the commandments, adhere to the commandments of Jesus. It's not to have a right relationship with God or one another. It's to not be loving the brethren. And that's another one. We're loving the brethren, loving each other, loving and knowing God. All these are in the 1 John. These are again consequences of the perfect tense. They're the continuing results of having been or has been generated out from. So this is enough to, again, you'll hear people, it seems to be an embarrassing difficulty when people ask, well, what difference does the new birth make? Or in a Western culture, faith is often just an abstract concept that's not known in the scriptures. The new birth is more or less a romantic notion without any demonstrable results. Idea of more of a Hollywood notion where people just tout it. But 1 John speaks of how it's lived out. And of course the perfect tense brings all that out. So that a person, for example, that were to be, let's say, brought into some battle between what they mistakenly call Calvinism or Arminianism, as though somehow there's nothing else to discuss. You might actually discuss the scriptures with them and explain to them that you have been born out from God completely, 100%. That's complete action. And you are living out the continuance of that. And the continuance of that, you could say authoritatively from the scriptures, is believing. And again, that would have to be in the same ing See, continuance, so we'll just put ing here. The continuance from that new birth. So here you've been born out from God. This is not about, you don't have to buy all those large books or the Institutes of Christianity or Beyond Calvinism book. Oh, they're just volumes out there. Just it's almost disturbing. And then people will pretend that KOINE is very mysterious. It's almost, everyone seems to want to contribute to the illusion of confusion. But here, continuance after the new birth. Perfect. You can say you have a perfect birth. A perfect birth, that is, it's 100% complete, and it has continuing, which here we know doing of justice. You can just keep making your list. Loving God, ing, of course. Knowing God. All this is in there. All ing, very carefully. Common language, very wordy, very very specific. It's I don't mean to make it sound so simple. It's just that what it speaks to is so profound, and these are such large things. And why are we not sinning? That's a result of the new birth. Not sinning, ing. Again, that continues. But you'd be better. Be careful. Make sure you define the word sin in the context. And then, of course, we're overcoming. That's in 1 John. Overcoming, ing, the world. So it's quite a new birth we have. It's quite, when the perfect tense is explained from a grammatical view, it's certainly empty of any significance as far as we're concerned as common or KOINE Christians. But it's certainly not empty of meaning and significance when we bear it out in the text with words like believing that Jesus is the Christ, doing righteousness, loving God and one another, knowing God, not sinning, overcoming the world, keeping, that's another one, His commandments, ing, it's keeping, adhering, and it's of course another ing. That's all this continuance of that birth is stated and assured by the perfect tense. Well, that's enough of that. This lesson was not intended to introduce much new, but to build on 1 John 5:1, and of course we'll have KOINE news in the future, but we'll have KOINE commentary or comments where, for example, I'll go through the entire very small 105 approximate verses, very tiny little letter of 1 John, and go through that, and with reference to the perfect tenses, the present tenses, the perfect which has completed, and then continuance of the action, and then actually express that. So this is enough for now. It's plenty to think about. It's a lot to be encouraged about, because you know this is coming from the Scriptures. And again, it may not always be brought out in English, but I remind you, in the King James Version, John 20 verse 31, they distinguished that translator of 54 of them. I would consider him number one as far as expressing how the KOINE expresses the ideas and thoughts and meanings conveyed spiritually to us. He said, believe, these things are written that you might believe, and that believing. So that verse there would be good to go to when you want to help someone understand that the Bible does distinguish between believe, punctular, and believing continuously. So that'll be enough for this lesson, and certainly enjoy reviewing it.